Now that we have a pretty firm foundation of the kind of the introduction to Microsoft Access, let's look at how we import tables and modify tables and the table properties that exist. And we're going to once again work with a Ridgedale College database as our sample working database, and we're going to once again be that graduate teaching assistant for the college, and we're going to once again continue to help better manage their course scheduling. So we're going to use this database and we're going to work on the tables and table relationships. So let's look at some of this information and how to import data using a spreadsheet wizard. The import wizard is going to be very helpful, and with specifically for this one we're going to be importing a spreadsheet or a Microsoft Excel worksheet. So we're going to use that import spreadsheet wizard to import the data from this support document we have that I like to keep my files located together so that when I do an import it's easy to find. Then we're going to take that data and we're going to append it to one of our tables. So let's go ahead and look at that data now. So since we're bringing in external data, we're going to go to our external data tab here on the ribbon. I'm going to click that. You can see imports. We're not exporting our data out, which we can, but for this part we're going to import from a new data source. We're going to select from a file and from an Excel worksheet specifically. So you can see import Excel spreadsheet. Click on that, and then we're going to locate our file. We're going to browse and just locate where our files are saved, and then we're going to append that data to our teaching assistants table. So I'm going to select teaching assistants. There it is. Alright, so I'm going to browse and locate that information. So here's where I have my file saved, and I'm going to use the teaching assistant support document here. I'm going to hit open. Now I've told it I'm going to append it to my existing table, so take this data and add it to. Hit OK. Of course, I'm sure I know it's safe. Here's what our data looks like. We have first name and last names of TAs. So I'm going to hit next on that. Here I'm going to import this. I've already told it where to go through there. We're not going to analyze it, so I'm going to hit finish. I do not need to save these import steps because I'm only going to do it once. If it's something I'm going to do every month, then I would save that in case I'm going to be adding new data to that and removing data from that support document, but I'm not, so I'm only going to do this once. I'll hit close, and now the information is in my teaching assistants table. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. We're going to look at that in our data sheet view, so I'm just going to double click on it, and there's that information we were just looking at. And you can see that this teaching assistant ID, that is a auto number, so that's why it added the number for the teaching assistant ID in our table. As it put a record in, it went to the next record, so okay, here's another record, and it indexed it by 1. Alright, I'm going to just close my teaching assistant table now that I've verified that the data is there as I expected it would be, since all I was doing is just appending it to any data that existed. None existed. Now there's new information there. Now we know that in addition to their teaching duties, teaching assistants and professors also work on grants, and we want to be able to track those here in our database. So we're going to use the import spreadsheet wizard once again to import data from another support worksheet that we called grants. So we have that grant information, and we're going to bring this information and put it into a new table. So let's go ahead and do that now. In our spreadsheet, our first row contains column headings, so that will be directly put into our field headers, so we don't have to type those in. It's going to automatically do it for us. There's no other changes we should probably have to make to that, so let's go ahead and we'll do this, and we're going to call that new table. We're going to call that grants, and once again we're only going to do this once, so there's no need for us to save those import steps like we saw earlier. So once we do that, we'll open it up and take a look at the data that's in there. So once again, I'm going to go to the external data tab here, and I'm bringing in information from a file source, an Excel file specifically. You can see there's lots of different ways. If we had data in another Access database, we could bring it in from there, or the larger database software from Microsoft, the SQL Server. If we were using a Azure database, which is a enterprise level database, we could do that. Or if we're using a DBase, using a different software, we have lots of versions for bringing in different. We see we got ODBC databases. We have lots of different data sources we can bring data into to put into our database. But for this one, we're going to once again use Excel. And we're going to go to the same location again. And this time we're going to get our grants file. I'm going to open that. I'm going to import this into a new table, so I'm not appending it to anything else. I hit OK. There's my data. That's what it's going to look like. And we want to make sure that's checked. Yes, it contains headers. You can see those headers. The grant, short name for the grant, and how much that grant award is. So we can see we're going to have 9 records in our table, and here's the data that's going to be there. I'm going to click Next. I can see what that looks like. I'm good. I can just hit Finish at this point. I'm not going to save those steps. Hit Close. I'm going to name this Grants. So you can do it however you want to do it. I'm going to right click and rename. Call this Grants. I could have named it one of the steps. I just wanted to get through it and just show you this. There's our 9 records, and you can see our field names have been added as we expected. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and close the grants table. We see that we do have that new object here in the navigation pane. Let's go ahead and open up our professors table. We're going to open up this in design view because that's the view I like. Now that we have this available, we're going to use let's see, this prof title. Well, we know that most of our professors are going to have the title professor, so why don't we make that the default value down here. And we're just going to put that word in, professor. Hit enter. You can see that now every time a record is created, professor is going to automatically show up as the value for our professor title. Well, once I change fields, I'm in the wrong field, so I'm going to delete. I'm just going to cut that, go back to the professor title field and make that the active title. There we go. Now the default value, and since it is text, that's why I'm putting it in quotes. Hit enter, and now that will take place anytime we have a new record. Now let's look at our hire date here. There's our hire date. Now let's change our input mask for this, and we want this to be a short date. So you can see I have 3 dots over here at the end once I click in that field for the input mask. And now I'm just going to select which type I want. I don't need to save it, it's already saved, but okay. There we go. There's our short date. That's how we want our date to be represented. So we'll just hit finish on that. There's our short date. We wouldn't want to type that, so thankfully it is built in for us. Alright, I'm going to switch over to my datasheet view. Yes, save it, just get over there. You can see that while we don't have any information in this, it is ready for a new record, and that will take professor. And when we start putting in some hire dates, it will use the default view that we put in there. So let's go ahead and close this. We've made that change, so our professors table is much better formatted now. Let's go ahead and go on over to another object. Let's do our class master list table. Let's take a look at that. We're going to open that one in. You guessed it, design view. So I'm going to right click, design view. Alright, so now we see what fields we have, what data type that they have. Let's use the word yes as our required property that says this must be filled in whenever you're filling in a record. And we're going to use that for our description and credits field. We're going to make sure that that is turned on as a required property. So let's go ahead and do that. Here's required. Right now it's currently set to no. We'll scroll on over and we'll select yes. We'll do the same thing for credits. Is it required? You bet it is. So we've changed that as well. Now because we made these changes to require information to be put into our whenever we have a record put in, it's going to give us a data integrity issue, and it's going to give us a warning message. So we're just going to click yes to make sure that our existing data is valid. So I'm going to hit save. You can see there's the error. Do you want we don't have a lot of data in there, so sure, please make sure those rules are applied to our data. All right, now we can close this. Now let's go back to our professor table, and we're going to open this in our datasheet view. So I can double click, or I can just put open when I right click there. So we can see the information there. If we look at our salary, I just don't like this. It's ugly. I'm going to select the salary field here, and I'm going to change the field value here. I want this to be a currency format. So I'm going to select my table tools, the fields tab here, and here in my formatting, I want that to be currency, which is my current data type, but I want the format to be currency. So I'm going to drop this down and select currency. Now you can see I have the $ and commas and a decimal point to show any type of change. Alright, let's move this salary field and let's put it after the professor's last name. And with this selected, I'm just going to hold my mouse down there with my left click. You can see that black bar going up and down. That means, hey, where would you like to move me to? And I'm going to put it after the professor's last name. So as I drag it, you see how it gets placed. And right there is where I want it, and I'm going to let go, and there is the salary field moved right after the professor last name. Alright, we've made some changes. I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to close my professor's table. Now I'm going to open up the class master list. We haven't looked at that one yet, so I'm going to double click that, and we can see what information is here. This should look familiar from our first lesson. Alright, while I'm looking at this, I want to make a change here. I'm going to take this description field and see, I can't see everything, so I don't like this. Now we can auto fit this, so let's just do that like we've done in Excel. We're just going to go here in our description field, put our mouse between where we see the cursor change, and double click for an auto fit. That looks a lot better. Alright, so we've done that. Let's go ahead and add a new field right after the credits here, and we want this to be of a number data type. We want this to be if there are any lab fees that are associated with the class. So we want this to be a number data type, and we're going to simply call it lab fees using the Pascal case naming convention again. And there is our new field. Alright, that's a good change. Let's go ahead and save and close this table now. Alright, let's open up our professor's table once again, and this time we're going to look at all of our data in there. So we're just going to do it in datasheet view. So double click it. Now we can see all the information for our professors. We can see their IDs that have been associated with them. We see what department they're in, what their extension is, how much they make. So that's a lot of good information. But the extension is not actually the professor, it's actually for their office, so we really don't need this here. So let's get rid of this. I'm just going to select it, and you can do it different ways. I can right click and delete, or I can just simply come over here and delete the column. I don't know why Microsoft didn't put field, but we're going to delete the extension field. Yes, I'm sure I want to do that, and I'm going to save that because that change is made. So once again, you can see the undo button is not there. Let's go ahead and make a change to our salary field here. And what I want to do is, I just don't like the decimal places, so let's take this down to 0. So you can see here in the formatting, I can increase or decrease my decimals. I'm going to take that down to where I don't see them, so that's essentially decreasing it to 0 placeholders for my salary. Alright, that's a good, I really like that change because I just don't like seeing them, especially if there's no need or value to that being shown. So let's close this table. Now I'm going to open up my teaching assistant table. There it is. I'm going to open up that in design view. And I'm going to go to my stipend field here. And I want to change the default value of the stipend to equal to 1,000. So if I come down here with the stipend field selected, and I come down here to the default value, if I change this from 0, all I need to do is say, actually I want this to equal 1,000. And I'm going to increase the number of decimal places to 2 on this one. It's currently set for auto. I can either select that and change it, or I can do this massive drop down and select 2. Now we've made 2 changes there. Let's save this. And I'm going to go into datasheet view just to see that. You can see that the next record is ready, and it will say, hey, they've been given a stipend of 1. It should be 1,000. It's only showing 100, so that means I need to go back in, and I only put in equals 100. So I'll make that change, save, change my view, and it was made. The change was made. So that's great. So now we've got that done. Now I'm going to close this table. And looking at this, I want to change this from department list to just department. So I'm just going to rename that. Take away the name list. Just call it department. Should want to make that departments because that makes much more logical sense. There we go. We've made that change. So we've got that done. Let's go ahead and open our grants table. And let's go ahead and open this up in design view. Let's take a look at that. When I'm looking at this here, I want to add a new field right here. Just put it right below the average grant award. I'm going to call this Prof ID. I hope you see where this is going, where we're going to create a relationship because we know Prof IDs are already used in our professors table. So Prof ID. We want that to be short text. This is, since we know this is a primary key in our professors table, here it will be considered a foreign key. It is a, which means it's a primary key in another table. So that's why we use that term. And this will allow one record in our professor table to be linked to many records in our grants table. And that's what that means. So made that change. I'm going to save that and close my grants table. Now I've talked about relationships. I'm going to open up the relationships table, and that's here in our database tools. So to do this and see our relationships, we have the relationships group here. We click relationships. Now we see what relations exist. Let's go ahead and add some tables here. So we just click on the show table button. Now here we have a list of all of our tables and queries. So what we want to add here on this one is we could add any table and then create those relationships. You can see we already have some relationships here between some tables, between the professors and sections, and the class master list to the sections, where we have a one-to-many here and a one-to-many here. So one professor could have many sections of a course. Let's add our grants table, and we can just double click that. It gets added automatically. And our departments table. And I'm going to hit close. I could have selected one and clicked add, but I just assume just double click. Now you can move these wherever you want. You can see how there's this one automatically detected that the department and the department ID have the same information. So we have one department could have many professors assigned to it, so that's why it's a one-to-many relationship there. You could have a direct one-to-one relationship. There are many different types of relationships that could exist, but you just have to know which data is in your tables to understand those relationships. So we've got these two added here. I'm going to create a one-to-many relationship between the professors and the grants. And I'm going to do this using the Prof ID field that is in both of them. So I'm going to have a one-to-many. So one professor could have many grants. So you see I click Prof ID and I come down here to the grants table and let go on the Prof ID here. So it says, hey, I see you're creating a relationship between the professor's table and the grants table, and I notice it's a one-to-many relationship. I want to enforce referential integrity here to make sure that the data is, the integrity of my data is there. So once I do that, I can simply hit create, and there is my relationship. Alright, let's go ahead and add our teaching assistants table here as well. We see we haven't added that here, so my show table, and I'm just going to teaching assistants, add, and close. And once again, you can move this wherever you want. I'm going to create a relationship between the teaching assistants table and the sections table. Like I said, I'm going to move it over here. I'm going to bring this down just for visual ease. Alright, so now I've got this across from my sections, and I'm going, like I said, I'm going to create a one-to-many relationship using the TA ID field in our teaching assistants, and we're going to tie that to the teaching assistant ID field here. I know you can't really see that well. There we go. So I'm going to click and drag and put that over top of the teaching assistant, let it go. It says, hey, I notice you want a one-to-many relationship between the two. I'm going to enforce integrity there, hit create, and now we can look back at how all of our data is related to one another. So you can see we have one teaching assistant could be tied to many different sections of courses, and I've already explained some of the other ones, so that looks good. And now we hopefully better understand why we call this a relational database, because we want to relate data and not just have everything in one place like we do in an Excel worksheet. I'm going to go ahead and close my relationships window here. Are you sure you want to save this? Yes. Now I'm complete all my work for the college. Now I'm ready to just save this. So I'm going to go to my backstage view by clicking on file, and I'm going to compact and repair my database once again to make sure all my data is secure and free of any errors, and it's of a manageable size for my database. That's it. I hope you found this information helpful and that you enjoy your continued studies into the Microsoft Access database world.